View better. Hi, Professor and TA. We are from Team 27, and our team comprises of Vijomit Charita Balagam, myself, Ramya Sri Kalapalla, and Sadikuddin Mohammed. And today we would like to discuss on the topic which is presented, like risk assessment of additional works in railway construction, investments using the BASE network. So we would like to proceed further. In the next slide, we will be explaining about what risk is actually. A small brief about the project. In Poland, an EU project is underway that comprises of investments, building, renovation, and modernization of around 9,000 kilometers of railway lines. So putting such a large-scale strategy into action entails numerous hazards, including the chance of unexpected or additional work. So choosing the right risk management approach can reduce the negative consequences of risks and ensure that investment objectives are met correctly. So risk actually refers to situations with uncertainties that arise during the project implementation, whereas risk mitigation refers to the efforts made to reduce the impact of risk. So these strategies are based on the standards, including an ISO 31,000, that is 2012 risk management principles and guidelines. While the approaches to risk are based on the concepts of the Project Management Institute, PRINCE2, and the Institute of Civil Engineering. So according to the ISO standard, risk can be seen as a mix of the event's consequences and the associated probability of occurrence. So it is calculated using the formula R as a function of T and C, where R represents risk, P is the probability of a specific event occurring, and C represents the impact or consequence of the event on the project's final outcome. So basically, the factors initiating risk are dependent on different variables like the type and size of the project, legal and political conditions of the project, and the construction environment too. So these impacts are indicated as a change in the investment's duration or in the project's cost. So let's go further and understand the risk management process in the next slide. So the risk management process, according to ISO 31000:2012, is shown in the slide that we are seeing. So the stages required specialized software, risk identification, and like risk assessment. So in risk assessment, Bayesian networks and fuzzy set approaches are used along with other multi-criteria methods. And the next step is like determination of the risk validity and then creation of risk management strategies. So it basically begins with establishing the context, and in terms of risk assessment, we have to do risk identification, risk analysis, and the evaluation of risk, and then a certain treatment is done in order to mitigate the risk. So this is the risk management process. Now let's go further and understand like what are additional works in construction in the next slide. So the occurrence of additional works is one of the risks that has a significant impact on a construction project. These are the outcome of a variety of issues that, despite the investors' due diligence when developing a building project, result in an unfavorable situation involving a change in the assumed design and procedural, organizational, technological remedies. So in-depth study of available data, collecting expert knowledge, or forecasting the probability of occurrence of phenomena that may occur during the project, all these are related with detecting causes that initiate the appearance of this sort of work and identifying their implications. So it is critical to take into account the local conditions in which the construction project is being carried out. So starting with the announcement of the construction tender procedure, one should be very mindful of the possibility of exceeding projected resources, particularly the selected budget. So improving the estimation of expenses of planned investments and optimizing the spending during the investment also helps. And in the next slide, let us understand what is the framework model for risk assessment method. So according to the ISO standard, risk assessment mainly consists of three successive stages. The first stage is risk identification. So this identification process should be carried out as thoroughly as possible, taking into account all relevant contexts, factors, and circumstances. The risk identification process can be aided by the risk management, that is the risk assessment approaches, which defines the most generally used techniques for hazard identification and analysis. So the standards content lists 31 approaches, which are grouped into categories based on their applicability to the problem and given a suitability rating. The right technique depends on the nature of the risk being investigated as well as its unique circumstances. Structured or semi-structured interviews methods are used at the risk identification stage. Now, the second step is the risk analysis. So Bayesian statistics and Bayes networks methods are used for risk analysis. It allows modeling assuming high uncertainty or on the inference of cause and effect. And the third step is risk evaluation. So it's a consequence of probability matrix method is used for the selected scenario for risk assessment. It allows us to identify the level of risk and to do activities which are necessary for its mitigation. So in the next slide, we will understand how to identify the risk of additional works in railway projects. So basically, a questionnaire containing more emerging factors of additional work in construction is projected to the subjects. So this questionnaire mainly consists of questions like specifying factors that lead to formation of additional works in railway infrastructure construction investments, as well as what is the probability of them occurring. The second question would be the types of construction activities that occur as a result of additional work in railway infrastructure construction investments, as well as the probability of the risk. And the third one is like mentioning 3 time periods in months that describe the most likely date for extending the duration of the railway infrastructure construction project due to additional works and the probability of the risk. And the next question is the 3 number ranges in percent of the investor budget that are most likely to raise the financial resources that the investor must get for the completion of the railway infrastructure building project as a result of additional works, as well as the probability of that happening. So who are the subjects for this interview? 5 participants in the construction process in Poland who are involved in the construction of railway infrastructure are selected, and the experts were carefully chosen and the research was conducted through interviews. The writers purposefully chose each respondent to represent a different company. So people from large construction enterprises, over 200 employees, were chosen for the study because they had relevance experience, seniority, and practice in supervising the implementation of such projects. So let's go and understand what were the results of this survey in the next slide. Um, the responses were utilized to identify the risk variables as well as a qualitative description of new types of building activity that have emerged. So in addition, the respondents mentioned the impact of individual causes of additional work on the appearance of additional costs during the implementation of a building investment and the lengthening of the construction and assembly work periods. So each response was also given a likelihood of occurrence expressed in percent by the respondents. So the arithmetic mean of the expert responses was used to calculate the anticipated risk level. The probability level of occurrence was reported in percent for the risk factors that cause additional works and the types of additional works. And the Bayes network model featured the determination of the level of probability of the consequences of additional works due to the huge number of possible combinations. And next we'll understand how these elements are grouped in the next slide. So risk identification should include the following elements as per standard guidelines. One is the determination of risk and determination of consequences and determination of possible scenarios. So the respondents in the survey responses were categorized according to the specified theme. As a result, 3 distinct groups emerged. So risk connected to the appearance of additional works were separated from the risk related to the occurrence of specific types of additional works in the risk category. And the process of risk identification was completed when the items were divided into categories. So this was how this was done. And the next will be continued by my friends.
Yeah, thank you, Sucharita. Well, coming to the next slide, we are going to see about the risk analysis. Mainly the risk analysis Bayes network method was chosen in order to calculate the risk modeling, and the risk analysis can be done through the 4 different stages, and we can see here the selection of factors that are used to create a model for risk assessment. Some of them are like a bad organization of workers, changes in the design and the software errors, and also the track and drainage works and the engineering object works. We can see it here in the slide. And considering the certain results of the research that were done before, we have chosen the occurrence of probability of each node, and there are of certain factors that are proposed during the risk analysis that can be seen in the figure. Well, from this, the Bayes network was chosen, which was used most appropriately in order to calculate the problems in the questions. It is done based on the probability of events that are based on the expert's knowledge, which leads to introduce a few information or the historical information that was explained before. And we have created this on the basis of the Netica software. It was a software corporation that has built the model for solving this kind of problems to analyze the risks in the form of the Bayes network. And now we'll see the second slide, that are the 4 different stages of risk analysis. The stages was related to the Bayesian network design, where each step include these 4 steps mainly. Those are creating the nodes of the Bayes network, giving relationship to particular nodes, and assigning even probabilities and performing the calculations, where these 4 different steps are performed during the different stages that are carried out during the risk analysis. And these 4 steps are based on the Bayesian network design. At first, create the nodes by considering the model's operations, then give the relationship to the nodes based on the operations that were performed, and then calculate the probability of the each node by using the formula. We are going to see it in the next slide, and then perform the calculations where that brings the conditional probabilities of the 2 events, that conditioning with events or with the others. And these 4 steps should be performed. And going to the next slide, we are going to see how to create the nodes of the Bayes network. Based on the characteristics of the particular node, each node is assigned with some particular unique events. In order to create that kind of events, we will have these 4 factors as a main. Those are selected risk factors and possibility of additional workers and the type of additional workers and their consequences. In this, we can see the possible probability scenario of the bad organization of workers here in the figure, where the probability of occur situation and it does not occur situation, we can see it here. And there are total of 9 nodes in the in each risk assessment model. Each was assigned with unique events followed by the model operations where the consequences and their occurrences were described. And this is an analog process of attributing takes place in each event, where the correct structure of the Bayes network always related to determine the relationship between the each individual node in the network. And based on the availability of data and the complexity, there are different approaches to be established in between them. And the relationship that we are used to examine all the possible scenarios in the process are to access the risk analysis. And coming to the next slide, we are going to see about the assigning even probabilities. This can be calculated using the conditional probabilities. In order to achieve the correct functioning of the model, it requires the probability of each event that occurred, and it determines the probability level of each event by calculating the conditional probability of each event. It requires all possible combinations of consecutive events and determining their probabilities, and they are connected always with the mutual relations that describe the conditional probabilities that are based on the chain method. And this requires all the possible combinations of the consecutive events in order to determine all the possibilities, and where the conditional probability of each event can be calculated by using the different formulas. Here in the table, we can see the example of conditional probabilities of an labor intensive process, and that contains the probabilities of all the events. And identifying the events and shapes is important for implementing the probabilities in between the nodes and activating them. And coming to the next slide, we will see how the calculations will perform. These calculations will perform using the conditional probability of the Bayes theorem, and we can see the formula here, where P of A by B is equal to P of B by A cross P by A by P of B. Where here A comma B are the events, and where P of B is greater than 0, and P of A comma B is a probability of event A occurring if event B occurs, and P of B comma A, B of A is a probability of event occurring if event A occurs, and P intersection A is a probability that is a common part of the events A and B. And the calculation results are the function networks that were used for future stages of evaluation of the risk assessment. In the figure above, we can see the network that determines the conditional probability of events that occurs together. And the remaining slides will be continued by my friend Sadiq. Sadiq.
Thank you. Thank you. We are going to see about risk evaluation, building a risk assessment matrix. Firstly, to start evaluating the risk, we must know what is the risk being happened in the particular area. As of now, the methods which were discussed do not have the extra work in the process to find the risk. So authors have found a way known as matrix method, which was developed in order to evaluate and also to know the risk involved in an area. The risk is defined as the probability of the risk on a subject and also its effects on the subject. The risk evaluation involving the matrix method is defined as the probability on the subject and also its effects on the subject. Lastly, selecting the range of the values in order to determine the range of the probability values. There have been 5 intervals which were being developed in contrast with the probability values. The effects of these intervals are being defined as events which are characterized into 3 intervals. This intervals results in the events having more time in the execution of the subject. In order to tally the risk criteria, firstly, we have to assume the risk levels. There are 4 levels of the risk that have been defined. They are low, medium, high, and very high. These are the levels which are developed in order to determine the risk. Also, with the probability to analyze the events, the above defined levels can be used to determine the risk management in order to match the risk with the correct range values. We have a range values from 2, that is lowest and rarest risk, and to 50, that is very high and almost certain risk. Now coming to next slide, we the risk levels along with the point values and actions are presented in this table. We have low level, medium level, high level, and very high level. Low level is risk acceptance, that is, and coming to medium, that is risk tolerance. High consists of conditional risk tolerance, and very high consists of disapproval of risk. Now coming to next slide, that is the risk assessment matrix table is presented above. Usually the risk assessment is defined as a combination of the risk criteria and along with the effects of the risk are also included in this matrix method. In the above table, we can see the matrix boxes are defined using 2 different colors, with 2 different colors that are 4 different types of, we are defining this risk assessment table by using 4 different colors and their associated values. The colors which are being used are: the low risk level is defined by using the color blue, the medium risk level is defined by using the color green, the high level uh, is defined by using yellow, and the very high level is defined by using the red color. Now coming to base base network. Base network is used in the discussion of the problem which are going to solve with the unique probabilities in the mathematical form along with the particular event scenarios, along with the base event probabilities which are being discussed in this research work. And also an individual can differ the variance which have been defined by using the conditional probabilities of the particular nodes. We can define the various probability levels. In reality, the probability events are selected with the probability value of 0% to 100%. The alignment of this probability events can be defined by the probability values that can be appeared are defined as 100%, and which cannot be appeared are defined as 0%. Based on the need of a person, we can divide the events. Also, they can be analyzed, or the event which has high effect on the node can be taken into the consideration. Usually the event is selected, then it is evaluated, and this associated risk is also calculated in comparison with the last one. Now coming to the event scenario analysis. Event scenario analysis. This circumstance was examined in the existence of a risk factor, along with the inconsistencies in the project documentation. The relevation of the problems in the project documentation, this event was modified. In this event, the hypothetical has an over a percent chance of reviewing the whole scenario. It it will demonstrate certain effects in the presence of event affecting existence after completing the whole study, as illustrated in the above picture. In the event of a disaster, this event scenario simulation will instantaneously affect the whole network incident as well as the factors, and also numerous interactions will be explored since it was published. The authors will pick the impact, such as at a price of 36.0 percentage, the activation phase will be extended to 3 months. The implementation duration will be prolonged by 40.7% for from 4 to 6th month. The implementation time frame will be stretched by 6 months with 23.3 percentage growth rate. Now coming to risk assessment of the analyzed scenario. The After carrying out the risk assessment, conduct a risk assessment of the accessed scenario. It should be provide more tasks, which should be indicated in the above table. As you can see, it has variant, the effect of the variant, effect of the event frequency, total points, and the low high values. Now the risk was computed and grouped in the applicable cells, and the risk assessment matrix after the points in the table were assigned. The generated data will be divided into into evaluation criteria. There must be two types of risk, that is low risk and high risk. So according to our assumptions, the developer should assess the assessment should be done by risk assessment technique, which has a low level of risk as opposed to high level of risk. It should be accessed from the perspective, and a high level assessment will be led to the minimization of the future updates to the investigation duration. Now coming to the risk mitigation proposals. The risk mitigation proposals consist of risk avoidance, risk transfer, risk mitigation, and risk acceptance, and last, emergency plan. The right control plan takes into account a number of factors such as the number of layers of exposure, the chance of exceeding cost, estimate targets, a library of allowed activities, and more. And it also contains a strategy for dealing with all this kind of project risk. According to the reasoning, it clearance it's actually need right now. Second, it is reasonable to expect that the danger will not be conducted based on the facts as a consequence of the finding, and the researchers have selected a harm reduction approach from among the available options that are likely to be applicable in the real project execution, that is risk transfer, reduction, and also emergency plan. Risk mitigation means minimizing the time it takes to complete a job or the amount of money it costs. Now, finally, coming to the conclusion, in the research paper, the authors has described the method known as risk management. Risk management has the following strategies, such as risk identification, risk analysis, risk assessment. The environment which is being selected contains a base network. A base network gives us the freedom to construct a more difficult and also more impactful network that can be constructed based on the past process, past data, and also opinions from the seniors, and also the methods. Risk mitigation methods can be implemented by using the well-programmed network, and also its impacts would be on the other nodes of the network. The mitigation process includes mitigants, which are normally used for analyzing the probability of the risk factors, and also these networks normally include the tools which can be used for analyzing the individual event scenarios. In order to reduce the risk in the network, the values compared and checked for the lowering of the risk factor. The authors have also evaluated a method known as learning, which was developed by using the old historic data and opinions of the subject experts. Thank you, Professor Andy.